This week on Locked On Dolphins has explored a potential free agency plan, a mock draft plan, and now it's time to put everything together with a projected starting lineup, 53-man depth chart, and more here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL draft lead for the 33rd team. I don't want to give a special shout out and welcome to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network, as promised, a double header coming your way today. Hopefully not a triple header. We'll see if we get any breaking news between now and the end of the day. But this morning we went over the Bradley Chubb rewriting of his contract. I don't want to call it a restructure because it's a pay cut. All right, we did that show this morning. But this week, has become tradition here on Locked On Dolphins, the week before legal tampering and free agency, I present a blueprint. And the blueprint is a full offseason plan with free agency and contract restructures and a mock draft, a 7-round mock draft. And then you put it all together at the end and you say, okay, well, here's what the starting lineup can look like. And here's what the 53-man roster can look like. And here's your salary cap forecast and so on and so forth. And we're not quite at the end of the rainbow in that regard yet, because tomorrow on the show, we're going to be looking into backup plans. And a big part of the reason why we're looking into backup plans is because it sounds like in some ways, this free agency class, it might get a little nutty. And in the event that it gets nutty, I think the budget is important. And we're going to go over that at the end of the show today, but not before we look at some projected starters after the mock draft, recapping the mock draft, and then we'll do a 53-man roster projection and kind of look and see how the talent stacks up in the ways in which I quantify evaluating talent at the NFL level. So with that in mind, our free agency plan involved, I'll give you some surface level stuff, but if you're only jumping in for the first time this week, highly recommend you catch the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday episodes this week because it explains this entire blueprint and pathway to the end 53-man roster you're going to see on the show today with the original plan with the budget. And then if the players go over budget, then you have to pivot to backup plans, which we'll look at tomorrow. Tyrell Dotson, Kader Kohou, the prominent internal free agents that were brought back in the internal free agency, with the objective being you're trying to find players that can help you get more physical, can help your core if your roster gets younger, mitigate your injury risk. You want guys that are going to help you play tougher on both sides of the football, and both from a pure physicality standpoint and then also dogs. So Kader Kohou, Tyrell Dotson, a couple of adequate level graded starters, in addition to a handful of other players off of last year's team that we chose to brought back. But those were the highlight players. And then you hit free agency with unrestricted free agency. And the plan there was depth in the skill groups, targeting multiple starting linemen on either side of the football. And that included Will Fries, that included Aaron Banks, that included Bobby Brown, a trio of guys. You want to talk about getting more physical in the trenches, those guys bring it. And then a pair of safeties as well. You know, we target Trayvon Moehrig, who I think is going to be a big ticket item in free agency. But if you're going to pay for a safety and you have a safety who's looking to get $15 million or $12 million or $14 million, wherever on that spectrum Trayvon Moehrig's budget falls, I'd rather pay it to Trayvon Moehrig. So then the draft happens and we tried to position ourselves as best as we possibly could. And just a quick recap, it was Jihad Campbell, linebacker / hybrid defensive player / pass rusher, with the pick at number 13. Defensive tackle Alfred Collins, an absolute mauler of a human being. They kind of joined Bobby Brown with Zach Sealer, and we brought back Deshaun Hand. In the 3rd round, it was Lathan Ransom, safety, big hitting safety out of Ohio State. And then we'll go through the 4th round, and you want the full class. You're going to see it here throughout the course of the rest of the show. Will Howard, quarterback, Ohio State, a little extra Tua insurance, and then Jalen Travis, an offensive lineman out of Iowa State. That is the quick and dirty recap to how we got to this point in time, which gets you to projected starters. And here's what I have for projected starters. If the Dolphins are going to run with, let's call it 21 pony, which that's a third down passing group, and it's I think one of their more exciting personnel groups that they have. You saw it's 21 is two backs, one tight end. That pass game group last year that showed some life was Devon Achane and either Jalen Wright or Raheem Mostert, who, in this blueprint, and the Dolphins obviously beat us to the punch here. They moved on from Raheem Mostert. So it's Devon Achane and Jalen Wright, with obviously Tua Tagovailoa quarterback, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, both still in the picture here as we get through the end of this. The Tyreek thing is another one of those ones we're going to get into tomorrow on the show, looking at contingencies, just because I don't really know. Like, I know what I would like to see happen. Is it going to happen? Predictively, would they move on from Tyreek Hill? What does the price point have to be? I don't know. We're operating under the assumption like Tyreek Hill is going to be back with this football team again next year. And that's kind of where we're operating. So you have two wide receivers in Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. Jonnu Smith, obviously your tight end in a passing situation. And a starting five offensive line of Patrick Paul, Aaron Banks, Aaron Brewer, Will Fries, and a healthy Austin Jackson. I think between that, we signed Joe Noteboom in free agency as a utility player. You got Jalen Travis in the draft as a mid-round guy who's a big-time tools guy, 6'7", 340 pounds, moves really well for his size. But played in the Ivy League before he transferred to Iowa State. I like this. And obviously, we spent on depth. We spent on depth at running back. We spent on depth at wide receiver. There's a lot to work with here, and I think a much more well-rounded offensive infrastructure. The challenge, of course, is keeping these guys on the field, as is always the case. Defensively, let's call it nickel personnel. You're talking about a front four, and remember, this is the blueprint. I put myself on the screen here. Don't yell at me. I'm not going to have Bradley Chubb on here, because this is the blueprint that we started at the beginning of the week. I can't call the audible midweek and put Chubb back on the roster. I'm rolling with what we had at the beginning, and then we could compare the actual final product to what the blueprint offers. So we in the blueprint at the beginning of the week said we're going to move on from Bradley Chubb post-June 1st with a post-June 1st designated cut. So that leaves Chop Robinson and Jalen Phillips as your top two edge guys. Obviously used a second-round pick on Alfred Collins, whether it's him or Bobby Brown as the defensive tackle opposite Zach Sealer. I think your 1 through 3 there is probably a little deeper than last year when it was Calais Campbell, Zach Sealer, and Deshaun Hand or Benito Jones. And we brought back Deshaun Hand. Your linebackers are Jordan Brooks and Jihad Campbell, which have a lot of complementary skill sets with one another. And then it really a 60% remade safety and cornerback situation with Kader Kohu and Jalen Ramsey as incumbents. Nate Hobbs, Trayvon Morig, both transplants in free agency from the Raiders. And then Julian Blackman as the other starting safety. I feel like this group, we went out of our way to target guys that are not long in the tooth, right? Because that goes back to the objectives that we had this entire offseason, which is our points of emphasis include mitigating injury risk and getting younger. I think we did that. Now, whether or not what is forecasted for cost or not is what these players are ultimately going to cost in real life is part of the challenge of doing this exercise. But that's why I do think it's important to point out what your salary cap budget looks like. So after having finished the draft and looking at a projected starting lineup, at the start of the draft, after finishing free agency, the remaining salary cap wiggle room to try to manifest as much of this as possible was about $8.06 million. But then because we chose to move on from Bradley Chubb, after June 1st, you process that, and Teron Armstead, you get another $1.2 million from Teron Armstead. The salary cap wiggle room goes back up to over $30 million, $30.79 million in cap space. once the 19.55 that it would have been for Bradley Chubb, or in this theory, this exercise, what you do get for Bradley Chubb at 19.5, once that clears, plus Tron Armstead, you got plenty of wiggle room. You got plenty of opportunity to have the space that you need. Now, you do need to budget some of this for in-season injuries. You need to budget signing your draft class. And after you finish signing your draft class, it's going to cost you, with the 10 picks that you made, about $7 million in cap space. But all of that gets you to a point where you can have a competitive June, July, August, September. You can have wiggle room if something comes down the pipe. You can have wiggle room to roll over cap into the future. You have your budget for your practice squad players as well throughout the course of the season. And we're going to explore what the cash versus cap element of that means and why that's an important subplot for all of this. That's coming your way next here on Locked On Dolphins, so stick with us. You've probably heard of Chewy. They really do have everything you need to help keep your pets happy and healthy, whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet healthcare. Chewy makes it fast, easy, and affordable. With over 100,000 products from all of your favorite brands, Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food to treats to toys to beds and grooming. Not just for dogs and cats, though. They've got supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, and small pets, too. Chewy makes it easy to manage your pet's health with prescriptions, telehealth vet visits, and even in-person vet clinics rolling out nationwide. And AutoShip is a game changer. You can set up automatic deliveries for food, treats, or any essentials so you never run out, and you can easily change or cancel at any time. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pets happy and healthy. Right now, you can save $20 off your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the show description. Save $20 off your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions do apply. See site for complete details. So I do like how this year's group all came together, and it was predicated on a number of different levers to pull, and that was trimming some rosters and doing the restructures and strategizing how you were adding without getting into, like, we didn't get into the $20 million AAV club for any free agents that you sign in free agency. First of all, I don't think it's that kind of class. Second of all, you might have to get a little weird in real life with what you're offering some of these players, in which case I think the depth that we have here on the 53-man roster projection we're going to go through now probably will be compromised. If you need to not pay Joe Noteboom to seal the deal and take the 2-year, $8 million budget that was there for a swing tackle, and if you want to hypothetically bring back Kendall Lamb in real life, I'm doing tomorrow's show today because this is what we do. It's sick and twisted in here. You could take that and pay Kendall Lamb on a 1-year, $2 million contract to come back like he played on last year, and then take the other $6 million and budget it into negotiating for one of your free agent guards. Hypothetically, right? Hypothetically. But this is the ideal plan, knowing full well that the plan, there's 32 different versions of ideal plans, and they're going to conflict with each other, and it's going to impact your ability to realize it. But this is the blueprint for what we're pursuing. Here's what the 53-man roster on offense looks like for the 2025 Miami Dolphins offseason blueprint. We have plenty of Tua insurance. I'm not going to guarantee that it's going to, we knocked it out of the park. I heard from plenty of you that are plenty skeptical about Marcus Mariota. But Tua Tagovailoa, Marcus Mariota, Will Howard, a 3-person quarterback room that has a good blend of youth, experience, different talent levels, different skill sets, but Will Howard, his leap really, I thought, came at Ohio State from trusting his playmakers and getting the ball out of his hand. Marcus Mariota's style of play, I think, fits within what they're trying to play in Miami. And you can contrast that to what Tyler Huntley's strengths were in Baltimore versus what he was asked to do in Miami. And you can very clearly see a conflict there. 4 running backs on the roster: Devon Achane, Jalen Wright, Travis Homer, and Taj Brooks, one of the late-round draft picks that we did in the mock draft. So 4 running backs on the roster, and then obviously fullback Alec Ingold. So that's your backfield players. Your skill group, 5 wide receivers, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Joshua Palmer signed in free agency. Obviously, you have the encouraging Malik Washington also in the mix here, and then Ben Skoranek, formerly of the Rams and Steelers, as your big-bodied special teams block game specialist type of player. The decision to lean into the wide receiver investments with depth is very important for me to disclose here. As is the investment in the interior of the offensive line, because the one need spot that I didn't really get a chance to address day one improvement on the offensive side of the ball was the tight end position. Now we have new blood in this room. We still have Jonnu Smith and Julian Hill. And then 2 tight ends that were drafted in Jackson Hawes from Georgia Tech, who is the inline type of player that can compete directly with Julian Hill for snaps. And then Jalen Conyers, who I view as much more of he's a 6'3.5", 260-pound run after catch type weapon that can be the Jonnu Smith groomed to be the air type of player. But 4 tight ends on this 53-man roster projection. But your inline tight end, you might have to go shopping post June 1st as a full disclosure. This is the challenge of you're working in a finite resource environment. I can't guarantee you're going to check every box. We went into it a little bit yesterday when we did the mock draft. We talked about the idea of if you are in pursuit of a perfect roster with perfect depth across the board, you're probably going to sell yourself short on having some identity. And I'd like to think this plan, yes, you want more competition for Julian Hill, but if Julian Hill's as bad as you perceive he is to be, if you're a fan that is low on Julian Hill, and I think that there's still hope for Julian Hill to be a depth player who you can call upon as a tight end too, as an inline player. Maybe Jackson Hawes beats him out, but maybe you need to go shopping post June 1st. And the good news is more often than not, that is a position where there's a couple of guys you get to the beginning of June that are laying around. We mentioned the starting projected lineup: Patrick Paul, Aaron Banks, Aaron Brewer, Will Fries, Austin Jackson, with 4 backup players, including Joe Noteboom, who's kind of the utility for the 4 spots. We're running it back with Andrew Myers, the backup center. They're invested there. Would like to see that one through. Keon Smith, who was brought back on a exclusive rights free agent tender this year, looked good in 2023. Promising development from him before he had a season-ending injury in the preseason last year. And then obviously our 4th-round pick, Jalen Travis. That's 26 players on the offensive side of the football. Over on defense, let's project into base defense, which is 3-4. That's Zach Sealer, Alfred Collins, your rookie 2nd-round draft pick, Bobby Brown, your free agent signing from the Rams, interior trio, and then Jalen Phillips, Chop Robinson. The depth of that group is a little light, and it's not necessarily a world you want to live in, but we're trying as best as we can to protect ourselves, which is why Jihad Campbell's experience playing on the edge is helpful. We brought back Quentin Bell. We signed Patrick Jones in free agency to kind of take the Bradley Chubb role and paid him a competitive salary. It was close, pushing $6.5, $7 million per year was I think that budget for Patrick Jones. And then Muhammad Kamara projected to make the roster. And then obviously the interior backup guy, and the Dolphins carried 4 last year, and there'd be somebody else on the practice squad you could tap in here if you needed to, was Deshaun Hand. Man, I feel good about this linebacker group, though. Jordan Brooks, Jihad Campbell, Tyrell Dotson, and then just outright, Channing Tindall's your 4th. I'm not going to project Channing Tindall to make the roster. So you're going to need unequivocally a post-June 1st ad as a guy who's a linebacker. And my mind there goes back to Curtis Bolton, who they added last year in the summer as like a potential teams guy. And I thought he had a really great preseason. Now, the numbers game didn't work out. I think part of the reason the numbers game didn't work out is because the Dolphins were trying to make this thing work with Channing Tindall. Another year's gone by with guys getting banged up and dinged up and not being able to play. And lo and behold, you know who didn't see the field again? Channing Tindall. So we're not going to do that song and dance in a contract year. If the breakthrough is not going to happen, we're not going to project you to make the roster. Corner, same thing. And it's an acknowledgement, again, of a finite resource environment, not wanting to overpromise and underdeliver. I do think there's another outside. You do need a third outside corner you feel good about. And that's another spot where maybe that is a veteran. And maybe that flies in the face of some of the stated objectives of this offseason with this blueprint plan. But you have Jalen Ramsey. You have Nate Hobbs, who was signed in free agency from the Raiders. We brought back Kader Kohu on the restricted free agent tender. Storm Duck and Cam Smith, young guys that were on this roster last year. Cam Smith's the last one on the cut. Like, we're getting close to Channing Tindall territory with this one. And because of that, I'm projecting post June 1st edition once you have the wiggle room. And I have both of those two spots, your depth linebacker and your outside corner. I got a budget of $5 million to work with one way, shape, or form. Whether that's 1.5 for the corner or 1.5 for the linebacker and 3.5 for the corner, whether that's 2.5 a piece, however you want to slice that. Well, I've got that budgeted into when we get to the 53-man cap projection. $5 million is going to be cut off for those two post-June 1st ads at corner for an outside corner, veteran player, and then your special teams linebacker. And then your safeties of Trayvon Moehrig, Julian Blackmon, 2 draft picks, Keaton Crawford, the late round guy, special teams exclusive type of player, Lathan Ransom and Patrick McMorris, guys that can potentially be groomed and compete with one another to hopefully take the Julian Blackmon spot, who we signed in a 1-year deal in free agency after he signed last year to re-sign with the Colts on a 1-year deal in free agency. This obviously also you need to include Jason Sanders, James Burnip, the rookie punter from Alabama that we took with our last pick in the mock, and then Blake Ferguson is the long snapper. So that's a 53 projection for this group. We're going to get just a little bit of the numbers as far as the distribution of how those players are quantified, get into the final salary cap figure off of that 53 projection, and then get into cash over cap as a big soapbox moment here on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. From a salary cap perspective, that 53 that we just discussed, after all the moves that we made, after all of the strategic restructures and cuts, and by the way, we didn't touch Tyreek Hill's contract. We didn't touch Tua Tagovailoa's contract because I think the 2026 flexibility with those is really important and not prorating more money out into the future unless you absolutely have to. Well, you shouldn't have to now because after you get to 53, after you budget for $5 million for a pair of new signings, one is an outside corner that's a veteran player and one is a special teams linebacker, and after you budget about $4 million for the practice squad, your final 53-man salary cap forecast still leaves you with almost $17.5 million in cap space. Whether you use it, whether you carry it over, whatever that looks like. But that budget's for the practice squad. The only thing that will change that number, that 17, it's $17.39 million in cap space, is if somebody gets hurt and you sign a new player to the active roster. But if you play the practice squad game and elevate somebody up off the practice squad and they become a minimum salary player and then you put somebody else back on the practice squad, you might be talking about a couple $100,000 difference when it's all said and done. You got 17 and change to work with. Seems plenty reasonable. Right now, the real life version of this is going to be different because there's not $19.5 million in salary cap savings coming for the Dolphins post June 1st, unless they trade Tyreek Hill. That's neither here nor there. But the breakdown on this roster, on the offensive side of the ball, you have 7 players that are graded as either roster cornerstones or quality starters, plus another 3 players that are graded as adequate level starters. There's a lot of depth caliber players here. You got a lot of quality depth rated players behind your wide receivers. You have a lot of depth rated players on the offensive line with Keon Smith and Joe Noteboom. Obviously, you've got a rookie there that you don't quite know what he's going to be with Jalen Travis, but there's a lot of rookies. We had 5 projected rookies make the 53-man cut on just the offensive side of the football. That's what Jalen Travis, Jackson Halls, Jalen Conyers, Will Howard, and Taj Brooks. That's the 5 rookies on that side of the football. You're carrying 3 quarterbacks, including one that's getting a 2-year, $12 million a year contract in Marcus Mariota, rated as a quality depth player. Patrick Paul's an incomplete evaluation. I would lean into adequate level starter, but we need to see more that can swing and change based on more of a sample size. On defense, we have a little less in the way of quality depth. We have less in the way of rookies, but we also have some mystery bag players with the 2 post-June 1st additions that we're forecasting for that. I'm not going to sit here and tell you who's going to be available post-June 1st. I've got no idea. But your cornerstones on this side of the ball, Jordan Brooks, Jalen Ramsey, Zach Sealer, another 3 quality starters, Chop Robinson, Trayvon Mooring, who is added in free agency, and Lord willing, a healthy Jalen Phillips. And then adequate starters with Blackman and Hobbs and Kohu. And if you told me Hobbs made a leap and became a quality starter, I believe that he's got that kind of ability at his disposal. Bobby Brown has a chance to be not just a sufficient level starter either. I think there's potential there. But that was part of, when you go back to objectives this offseason, what are you looking for? You want to get younger. You want to get more physical. And walking the line of achieving that in free agency sometimes means you go get a guy like a Bobby Brown that has 1 career sack. You go get a Nate Hobbs, who many perceive to be a slot player. I think he can play outside. I think he'd be an absolute dog. He's got that potential. The last thing I want to do, obviously on this show, tomorrow we're doing contingency plans and plan Bs and plan Cs at some of these spots. Who are the players we're tapping in as the backup plans in case the dollar amounts go crazy? I want to talk about the budget. Cash spent. This budget. And the budget might be more important than the players in some ways, because if you hold to the budget, that is, I think, what the Dolphins are threatening to reach critical mass is if they keep up their recent trends. There's a concept of cash over cap. And Eric DeCosta talked about this, the general manager from the Ravens, not that long ago, and talked about the concept of spending cash over cap. And the other team that he alluded to that is very frequently known to do this, woo breaking news as I'm recording this, Raekwon Davis cut by the Colts. I can't imagine anybody's surprised that was a contract that didn't age well. Anyway, the concept of cash over cap is you annually spend more cash than what the cap limit is on any given year. The budget presented in this presentation is $315.8 million in cash for the season. It's a lot of money, right? But the NFL salary cap at 279.2 puts the cash over cap ratio at 113% of the cap is the cash that you've spent. I want to put that number in perspective. 2024, that percent was 125. In 2023, that number was 117. In 2022, that number was 123. 2021, we got close. It was 114. And then in 2020, it was back to 117% cash over cap. This budget we've presented at $315.8 million in cash would be the lowest cash over cap ratio and percentage that the Dolphins have had in the last 6 years. Pause for dramatic effect. This is important because when you talk about walking the fine line between being competitive at the NFL level on an annual basis, putting yourself in position to be more competitive, and having better health and cap health, which was another one of the things that was a big point of emphasis. I'll just go to the Alfred Collins contract as an example. That is a 4-year contract for 48th overall pick in the draft. 4-year contract valued at $8.399 million for 4 years. If you hit with Alfred Collins, you got a 4-year contract at an average of $2.1 million per season against the cap. That's why we got 10 picks and I won 18 more, right? Like cost-controlled talent. And the Dolphins in 22 and in 23, they weren't about that life because all those draft picks went to paying Tyreek Hill $30 million per season and Bradley Chubb, $22 million per season. And I get it. You had a massive influx in rookie contracts the 2 years before that, and you're balancing out the scales and making sure you have talent that's established talent around young talent and call it. I get what the thought process was. But when we talk about losing your way, this is what the domino effect is. And this is the opportunity cost. Lathan Ransom is the 98th overall pick. That's a 4-year, $5.8 million contract. None of his 4 years has a cap schedule that's over $2 million. None of them. And that includes a $1 million signing bonus. Now, you got to hit on your picks. You're not going to hit on all your picks. That's the unfortunate reality of the beast. Nobody's hitting on 100% of the picks. But if you're going to achieve sustained success, the yo-yo, last year, 2024, the cash over cap, and look, they paid Jalen Waddle, they paid Tua Tagovailoa, they repaid Tyreek Hill, they repaid Jalen Ramsey. Like they put a lot of money out to get guys happy, on the same page, and mentally prepared to play a season. It kind of blew up in their face. Who are the right players to continue to be here after getting that vote of confidence and compensation from the team? That's for them to figure out. But we're potentially cutting our cash over cap ratio in half with this budget because we are embracing building through the draft and being selective. And we had a couple of bigger contracts. Now I'm not asking you to sign anybody for $25 million a season. But the budget, $315, remember that number. The Dolphins last year, by the way, spent $319.3 against the salary cap of $255.4. So the salary cap is $24 million more? And the Dolphins are spending less in cash this year than they did last year on a blueprint like this. That's the ticket to sustained success. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. I hope you guys like the final product. I don't expect you to agree with everything. Let me know what you like, what you dislike. And then again, tomorrow on the show, we're looking at backup plans to try to keep it as tight to the budget as you possibly can so that you can have yourself positioned to be competitive this year and simultaneously not burn down the house around you in 2026 amidst the pressure to win so that you can have sustained success, which is the right way to do this. I'm going to end that tomorrow. You're on Locked On Dolphins. Appreciate you guys as always checking the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Talk to you all again soon. Go Fins.